we're going to go over some advanced techniques in rule designs. Decisions is a workflow and rules engine, so we're about to go over 50% of our product right now. So get the notepads out, make sure you take a lot of notes. We're going to go over half the product. So yeah, Josh, there's my info. If you want to send me an email, correspond after this, I can provide you the slides, however you need to get this information. So this is going to be more of an interactive session. I'm going to talk about the slides for a little bit, and then I'm just going to bust open the designer, and we'll walk through creating a couple pieces that are on the slides. So all the information that I'm going to talk about is in here, is in the slides. So if you need it, you can absolutely have access to it. So these are the things we're going to go over. Rule sets, template with instances, rule sets conditional, rule audit history, and rule extensions. And at the end, probably my favorite thing is just go over use cases, and we'll talk about real customer examples of some ways they've used the rule platform to perform business logic. So a rule set. A rule set is a collection of rules inside of a folder that can be run all at once inside of the Flow Designer, right? So instead of putting rule back to back, you can put them all inside of a folder. They'll all be evaluated at once, and the responses of those rules are kind of collected at the end to be able to be utilized, massaged, whatever you need to do to get that data, to get the responses from the rules. So I'm going to go ahead and bust open the Flow Designer, and I'm going to make a rule set. So in the top of any designer folder, you're going to have create rule, and then in that, you're going to have rule set. So we go in here, create a rule set. I'm going to say rule set template with instances. Hit create, and we're going to be given this folder view of a rule set. So a rule set is essentially a folder that has constrained the designing process of the items that you can create inside of the rule set. So you can only create rules and flows that align with the purpose of the rule set. So I'll walk you through setting it up, and that'll make a lot more sense once we go through that. So if I go through the setup screen, there's a bunch of stuff, a bunch of options here on how you can configure your rule set to best fit into your scenario, right? So the very first one up here, we're going to get service settings. If you don't want to interact with the Flow Designer or integrate with the Flow Designer, you can just integrate with the rule set itself, right? You can just configure the rule set to be able to integrate with it directly. You don't have to wrap a flow around the step, around the rule set. You can just interact with it directly. This rule set data right here, these are the inputs to your rules. So I'm just going to put an account object in here. And then now every single rule or object I make inside of this rule set will have this input of an account, right? That's constrained over the entire rule set. Every designer item you make inside of it will have that account. So if you want to add a new variable to one of your rules, you just add it to the entire rule set, and it'll be a new input for your entire set. So after that, we'll look at setup right here. Now this usage right here is your responses from the rules. So however you want the output of your rule to be, you set it up right in here. Logical is going to be Boolean value output. You're just going to get true and false, right? So in the rule designer, all you're going to have access to is true and false. When we think about data return, that's your most flexible setting on here. Any rule is not going to output true or false, but if I click it, it's going to allow me to pick a type to return. So if my output of my rules is more complex than just a true or false, let's say I want to return maybe a warning or something like that, maybe an exception message on why it's false, a reason, I can switch that return type to be anything I want. What I recommend to customers is really set a type to be this output, not just a string basic level type. What I would recommend doing is maybe making a flow structure to put a bunch of fields inside of the object to return upon every rule. But we'll get more into that as we kind of create a couple. The scoring output is going to output a collection of numbers and values so that at the end of your rule set, you can kind of sum them all together. You can do maybe the top score, the lowest score. You can order them. However, you kind of need to set up that rule set. Data return is by far the most popular and by far the most flexible, because you can put an output of a score in the data type, and you can kind of combine everything into that data type and then perform more stuff on the data. So after that, we're going to get to rule set type, and this is where we're going to get the differences in the actual structures of how the rule sets are set up. So we have 3 types. Default, you're going to be set to instance. This is just a normal rule set, just rules inside of a folder, and you can run them all or execute them all, right? The one right above it is template with instances. This allows you to set up multiple rule sets inside of a rule set, and at runtime, determine which one you want to move forward with, right? Me and my wife just bought a house recently, and so what I was trying to relate this to is in the house buying process, the questions I had in the initial walkthrough were not the same as the questions I had in the final walkthrough, right? The initial walkthrough, I'm going, is this a good neighborhood, slab or concrete, what are we looking at underneath? And then the second walkthrough, I was asking how long the roof has been installed, you know, how old's the AC, do I have warranty on these things? The data set was the same, the house, but my questions were different. That's the kind of example here when I have a template with instances. A customer use case that goes along with template with instances is insurance, right? The insurance questions or what qualifies you to get insurance is different from every state, right? The data is the same, right? The claim, or like what got hurt, what insurance provider, stuff like that, but the rules are completely different state to state. So you can use this to kind of gauge which instance you want at runtime and run different rules. Does that make sense? Okay. The third one, and I'm going to say this is the most popular as well, is the conditional rule set. This is where you can create a bunch of rule sets inside of a rule set. And then at runtime, what the rule set will do is basically allow you to set a condition at the top that says, do I want to run these rules? And if the condition is true, then it'll run them. If the condition is false, then it'll skip them. But what this allows you to do is nest rule sets inside of rule sets. So my example with the insurance claim, right? Let's say we threw in another wrench and we said, not only do I have state rules, but I have county rules, right? So then I would put at the top, say, is this the right state? Okay, run those rules. And then inside of that state, I would have, is this the right county? Run those rules, right? So it allows you to really make a robust rule set and then put it into your workflow, and it'll run multiple depending on the scenarios in which you want it to run. After this, we'll get into rule types, which is what kind of objects do you want to create inside of your rule set? So we have all these different types to be able to be used, right? We have flows, action rules, normal truth tables, normal rules. So you can put kind of any things, and you can constrain what rules you want your users to be able to use inside of your workflow or inside of your rule set. I'm just going to hit truth tables for now, and I'll put flows and evaluations. There's a couple other options in here. Interceptor rules are, if you want to know more about those, I'm happy to dive into those, but they're not that as common as the other settings in here. Output options allows you to say, do I want an outcome path for if all of my rules are true? Do I want an outcome path for all of my rules are false? Do I want to define my own outcome paths? So I'm going to put just done in here. Actually, I'll put closed. And then there's a bunch of other options in here to be able to improve the outputs of your rule set. Do you want to output all the true results, all the false results, all the error lists, all the no result, no run, all these other things? Do you want to output them all? And then when we talk about data storage, it's like, do you want these executions stored in your database, or do you want to kind of just use the output of the flow? Again, trying to give you as many options as you can for this rule set to be able to use it whenever, for whatever use case you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and save, and I picked a conditional rule set, and then I gave the input of an account. So you'll see here I have this completely blank screen, right? It's kind of confusing. But I'm going to go ahead and just create a new rule set. I'm going to call it Texas. And now I'm given this, this rule up at the top, and this is my condition rule I was talking about. So this allows you to set a condition on which to run the rest of the rules. So I can put as many rules as I want to under this control rule, and if this rings true, it will run them. If it rings false, it'll completely abandon the rule set, right? And I can go ahead and add as many things as I want in here. So I'll go ahead and add an evaluation rule. And this is the view of the rule set, or the rule inside of the rule set. It's a very constrained view. You can't add any inputs, you can't add any new outputs. All you can do is write the rule. So it makes it really easy for you to build a rule set and then give it to your business users and only allow them to run rules or write rules, right? Because they can't mess with the inputs, they can't mess with the outputs. They can only do kind of what you allow them to do. So if we come in here, we'll have our object, our account object. This is going to be the input that we provided earlier. And then you have all the properties of that account object to be able to run it on. I defined earlier the outcome data was a string. And so I can write kind of whatever I want in here as the output of the rule. As well as if you see over here on the side, we'll have this rule set outcome path. And we'll see my closed option that I provided in the settings. These both, if it runs this rule and it becomes on false, it'll immediately goes down the closed path. It won't run any more rules. It'll just go down that one path, right? So if you have like a rule that's critical to your business, say, I don't want to run any other rules unless this one's correct, right? Let's say has insurance, right? For my insurance example. If they don't have insurance, what's the point in running the rest? You can just go down an outcome path and not run anything else. So in here, I think I talked about how you can nest rules, nest rule sets inside of this conditional one. So I'm going to go here and just put Houston inside of Texas. And we'll see in the rule, in the tree up here, you'll see rule set template, Texas, and Houston. Houston will not run unless Texas rings true. So it is going to run the top level ones first, and then if that is true, then it'll run the lower ones down. So you can nest these as many times as possible to make your rule set as dynamic as you want it to be, or as dynamic as you need it to be. So you can run 50 or 60 rule sets inside of one rule set and have conditions determine whether to run the rules. Is that all making sense? Do I need to slow down or anything? I feel like I'm Russian, but I'm American. Yeah. For the outer layer? Yeah, you can set the order of the execution. You'll see right down here in the set order action. So you can set them in, like, if I want to run Texas first because I know they're primarily going to be in Texas, why run Virginia? I can just set the order to execute this one first. Now, as well as the rules inside of the rule set, anything in here can be set like as an execution order. If you need one rule to run first, like that outcome rule I was talking about, if true go down the closed path, then I can set that one to execute first. So I no longer have to run all those other rules. Yeah. Is that execution order? Yeah. It's just you just pick which order you want it to run in. Yep. So we're really going to dive deep into this rule set in the next few months and try to improve this view, right? Because you see, I set the execution order, but there's no visibility there, right? There's no knowing which one is first and which one is bad. As well as if you click into this rule, there's this enabled button right here that I can completely disable my rule, not to be run anymore, and then no visibility on the other side to where it's disabled or enabled. So there's a lot of improvements that we're going to make to this rule set view to make it more friendly and give you more access to what your rules look like. I think you would have to right now. Yeah. You would have to either right click on it and set the order right there. So, Terry?
I appreciate the hierarchical difference of the rules in there, but
This you can run like a bunch of rules in here, have clear visibility into it. The matrix is going to be one singular rule that runs a bunch of rules inside of it. So it's more like this returns a list of data, whereas the matrix rule only returns one piece of data. Does that help? This runs like multiple rules inside of it, where the matrix rule is just going to be one comprised rule of multiple rules. Any other questions while we're talking about rule sets? Okay, so we're going to look into kind of what other things you can make with rules, starting with the rule audit history. In every execution of a rule, you can set the rule audit history to capture what happened on execution of said rule. So if you're trying to track this data long term, you want to see how many occurrences of false did this rule execute on, how many occurrences of true. You can set it and then quickly use that data inside of the database to be able to tell that kind of history of it. I'm going to go ahead and go to the query editor, and I'll show you this, this table. Maybe not. Luckily, I planned ahead. This is the rule audit table. It'll have ID, audit name, rule ID, where it lives. Here's the rule name, the rule text, what happened in the rule text, and then the execution down at the end, the result data. So if you want to, you can set this on every single execution of every rule in your process to really start storing the data of how your flow kind of maneuvered through the workflow, right? Show the false path, show the true path, and everything else, all given in this data set. I've seen users kind of have a rule that's super important to their process, and they will want to capture the audit and then have a metric of how often that rings true or false, right? And so then you can write like KPIs on this data of how many executions versus how many were true and how many are false, and represent that on a graph, if that rule is really important to your process, right? We're going to create something a little bit more niche right now. It's called a rule extension. If you come in here into the create rules, it's down here, this rule extension. This allows me to make a custom verb for my server. And so then every time I want to run a rule, I can use this custom verb over and over and over again in my process without having to duplicate the same verbiage, right? One of the most popular examples in this is on user action rules. You always have to set permission on who you want accessing a certain action. And what I like to do with these rule extensions is set an isAdmin rule verb, so that I can just plop into place every single time, so that I don't have to write that over and over and over again. So if I want to provide more access to the actions at a global scale, I can just put another group name in there to make it work. And I'll show you this example right now. So I'm going to just put isAdmin. And the rule extension view is going to look exactly like the normal rule view. And so I'm going to set a group name, or group names. And I'm going to go ahead and say group names, list contains administrator. And so once I save this rule, now this rule will become a verb that I can pick in all of my other rules. So if I'm going to create another rule that says, can user change password? And who I want accessing this action, or having access to this action, would be the person who is in the administrator group. So all I have to do is go to initiating user groups, and because it's a string list, I have access to my custom action called isAdmin. So now I can write that once instead of writing it for every single one of my user action rules. I can just write it once and use it all over the place. So it allows you to give you a lot more flexibility in designing these rules, because now you have your custom rule verb that you can just use all over the place. Okay. So we're going to go into some use cases now. And rule use cases are probably my favorite use cases, just because it's such a simple concept, but it can mean like it can have a drastic impact on the customer's kind of viewpoint of decisions, right? Back-end rule logics are a simple endpoint that can execute rules and then return a response. It's a very quick, think of it as a microservice, right? It could have a lot of work on the back end, but it's a simple API call to a server, run some rules, and get a response back, right? These are a couple examples of heavy rule implementations, right? This is an SOW review system that one of my clients made. The company is very, very large and has a lot of departments, right? So if an SOW comes across like we have to do this statement of work, then they have to figure out which departments are impacted, what departments does this involve, and who needs to review it, right? So it can be very complex given the size of the company, right? Of who needs to review said SOW. So one of my customers has created this dashboard where they can add rules as much as they want, and then at the end point they pick at the end of the rule they pick who needs to review this by role in the company. And so they'll say if the price is over, let's say $2,000, we need the financial team to review it. It's a very quick, go pick the rule, define the rule, this who needs to review it. Every SOW that is created from their company runs through this rule set, and then it just spits out a list of people who need to review this SOW. Therefore, like streamlining who has to access it, right? If we think about what happened before they had this process, somebody probably was given a piece of paper, had a bunch of information on it, and they went to a spreadsheet and figured out who needed to do it, right? With this, it's a very simple hidden API, and here's the list of people you need to review. Decisions tree rule. This one was really interesting to me because I never thought of a tree rule concept, but it's essentially a rule design flow that goes kind of down and tries to figure out at like the endpoint who needs to do such thing, right? What this company did is they had two sets of users. They had a development team and they had business users who were going to be creating these rules. They wanted them actually to interact with the flow designer because that's how they thought of their rule and decisions trees. So what they did was they split up responsibilities. The dev team strictly made subflows of the rules. They worked all day and said, okay, they need a string equals rule. That I'm going to make it and then provide it to the users to be able to pick it in their workflow. So what they did was they made like 20 or 30 rules. They limited the toolbox from the flow designer perspective so that all they could pick was the flows that they designed. And then their users could go into the flow designer at a constrained view. They couldn't break anything. They couldn't mess with the inputs or outputs. All they could do was pick a rule, drag it on, and connect it and design the decisions tree. So it was a very good experience for them because they could still keep their development team working and doing stuff and building stuff, but they've also split the responsibility so their business users could create flows. All that was based off of a questionnaire. So they designed the questionnaire in their system, and they designed the rule tree in our system. And so they would ping decisions with a questionnaire data set, and then they would run the rules against the data set to determine a verdict in their terms. So, yeah. Alaska spill matrix. This is my favorite use case of decisions, maybe because it's environmental impact. I'm not really sure. But essentially, this drilling team out in Alaska would find themselves spilling things a lot, as drillers often do. Maybe they do. And they would have to report the size of the leak, what was the contaminants, everything to all these natural protection organizations, right? So every time they spilled something, they had to make sure they tracked it, the size, what was spilt, and depending on the size and what was spilt was the organizations they had to reach out to. So what they did was they made this really small workflow. It was just a microservice. It ran a truth table, and it took in the volume, what was spilt, and where X and Y coordinates at where they were at, and it returned a list of phone numbers, email addresses, and the organization's name for them to immediately reach out to communicate, right? Because that stuff is like time pressing. You like have to communicate those fast, and so the drill manager on site fill in a couple things, hit enter, and then he had a list of phone numbers who to call immediately, right? There's no waiting, no pause in the meeting, just immediately contact them because that's what the organization wanted. That is all we have. Is there any questions you guys have on rule sets, rule implementations, rule extensions, rules, anything? Yes. Mm-hmm.
But what if it's a more complex rule that writes something to a database and I want to check that it actually wrote that to the database, so I have to run a separate query to make sure it really did that, or
Yeah.
something like that? How do I do that?
It's a very complex question because you don't want to, you want to check to see if the rule evaluated, but you also have to check the database to see what was manipulated, right? If something was written. So a lot of people will write wrapper flows around their flows. They will send the data in, and then on the outside, they will check to see if it actually got executed and wrote to the database, and then delete said row at the database. So it's a little bit complex because you're actually manipulating data, but it is possible through wrapper flows.
Can you automate that too?
Yeah.
Because right now, if I want to test a rule or whatever, I just say go run all.
Yeah, you would just have to run the unit test. You would have to run a unit test on that wrapper flow. Yeah, that just says this passed, this failed. So, cool.
With the example that you had given on the constrained view of the flow designer, what are the pros and cons of doing it in the way that you had described, where there are developers that are creating those subflows and then they have a limited view of the flow designer versus using simple flows?
Yes, there isn't really a trade-off there. What they really liked was the flow designer's ability to kind of add something to the top that says these are the options you have, and then you can go in and add your own. They wanted to do a couple more complex things in the flow designer that they ended up doing, which the simple flow just couldn't handle at the moment. But simple flows are being improved upon, so maybe that would be an option today. This was a couple years ago. Anyone else? Okay. Again, my name's Josh. You can email me, ask me any questions you want. If you want to talk to me right now, I'm happy to talk to you guys. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your time at Decisions Days. Thanks.